Hello and welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen. A deadline for Israel to re-establish aid into the Gaza Strip has been met this Tuesday. We have images of trucks rolling over the border into the battle zone. But will this eventually become the required 600 trucks a day that aid agencies say are needed to provide for all those who urgently need help right now in the ruins of the Gaza Strip? Let's give you the latest on the ground. Israeli strikes have killed at least 31 people in the last 24 hours in Gaza. Strikes that hit Khan Yunis and Deir al-Balach. And in Lebanon, at least 6 people were killed in strikes in southern Beirut. Our correspondent in Jerusalem says this figure could be as low as 6, could be as high as 40. They're still trying to assess the actual situation. The bottom line is people are under fire and being bombarded both in Gaza and in Lebanon right now. Our guests to discuss the issues in this debate in Gaza are Damon, founder of the International Network for Aid, Relief and Assistance in Awa. Awa, of course, is a former CNN senior correspondent, and thank you for agreeing to be with us, Awa. Pleasure to see you. From Washington, D.C., Hussein Ish, senior resident scholar, the Arab Gulf States Institute. Always a pleasure to have you on the programme, Hussein.
Nice
here in the studio, we have Mark Lefebvre, Israeli founder of Peace Now movement, a member of the Meretz party. Thanks for being with us, sir. And also on the other side of our studio, but not necessarily against, Bertrand Besancenot, French diplomat, former French ambassador to Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and consultant with ESL. First, let's set the scene. Israel's campaign in the north of Gaza and the evacuation of tens of thousands of Palestinians from that area has fueled accusations from Palestinians and internationally that Israel's clearing the area for use as a buffer zone and potentially for a return of Jewish settlers to the area after the war. Andrew Hillier with this.
It's more than a year since Israel first unleashed its firepower on northern Gaza. Now it's happening all over again. A renewed offensive on this part of the territory has triggered another mass exodus of Palestinians, up to 100,000 according to the UN.
They came to us at 6 in the morning with shelling and massacres, and they took us out. They took my brother and left his wife and children. God help us. Everyone is in the same predicament. Have mercy on us. We have been displaced 50 times.
North Gaza has suffered some of the worst destruction throughout the war. Israeli forces first left late last year before returning for a short burst of fighting in May. Now they're back, battling what Israeli officials call pockets of Hamas fighters which have regrouped. Israel says it killed roughly 750 of them in October. Security officials say the goal this time round is to isolate those fighters from others further south in Gaza City, tightening a siege that has had disastrous consequences for the civilian population. Kamal Adwan Hospital in Jabalia has run critically low on supplies, but Israel has denied accusations it is choking off aid or depopulating the north. On Monday, its foreign minister said residents could return after the war.
At the end of the war, they will be able to do that. Right now, there is still military operation where you mentioned it is not safe to be there.
But critics say that unless Israel finds an alternative to Hamas or a post-war strategy, the war will never end. The UN says a fifth of the pre-war population remains in the north, less than 100,000 people.
Andrew Hillier, our reporter. Let's bring in our guests to discuss the situation and go straight to Gaza, where Arba Damon is waiting. Arba, of course, former CNN senior correspondent and founder of the International Network for Aid, Relief and Assistance in Awa. Arba, you're in Gaza. Give us your sense of how things are there now and how things may or may not evolve.
Well, to put it quite bluntly and openly, things are at this point in time worse than they have been over the last year or so. Whatever, images there might be, whatever statements Israel might be making about humanitarian trucks rolling across the border, that is quite misleading. What we're talking about right now is an average of around 30 to 40 trucks entering Gaza a day. This is very far off the U.S. demand that was asking Israel to allow at least 350 trucks of humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. What we have right now is a situation where it's not just bombs that are killing people. It's not just the physical destruction of Gaza that is taking place. It's also extreme levels of hunger. There is imminent famine to be declared. There's also a lack of medicine, basic medical equipment. Just to give you one example, I was at the Aqsa Hospital in Deir el-Balah on Saturday, and I managed to secure a small number of tracheostomy tubes in pediatric sizes, in children's sizes, because they're not available. And without this, doctors are unable to stabilize the smallest victims of Israel's bombardment. And while I was there, I met a little boy who twice, at just 2 years old, twice already had been pulled out from underneath the rubble. And without this one small piece of plastic, this tracheostomy tube, doctors were not going to be able to stabilize him. That's not to mention, on top of everything else, if we just very briefly look to the north, where Israel has been launching that operation for nearly a month right now, you have 85% of humanitarian missions there that have been denied. So there has been, by no stretch of the imagination, an improvement on the humanitarian situation, quite the contrary.
Well, for now, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in our other guests to talk a little bit more about that situation in the north of the country. Mlev Bet Bzo here in the studio. The situation there, as I was describing, Mark, incredibly serious. It sounds like it couldn't get any tougher than it could be.
Well, it's incredibly serious, also not only from a humanitarian standpoint, but also from a military standpoint. I mean, the fights in Jabalia are still very fierce. Numerous Israeli soldiers have died.
5 recently buried.
It has been announced that 5 have died today.
Yeah.
And according to the army, the fights in order to gain control of this area should last many more weeks. So there is no end to the tunnel, also from a military standpoint, not only from a humanitarian standpoint. And from as far as the humanitarian is concerned, I myself, as a member of this of the left wing of the political scene in Israel, who always think that the best security for my country is to achieve peace, or at least to have things calming down, I'm looking for the ways to do it. And the Israeli government, actually, to my point of view, is stuck because of his extremist minority, far-right extremist minority, who blocks every step ahead, or every attempt to try to sort out of the deadlock, actually. And the key issue is the logistic control in Gaza. Although Hamas has been severely hurt from a military standpoint, Hamas still controls the logistic and is in charge of dispatching the aid which is coming. And so, from my point of view, the issue to be addressed by the Israeli government is who is going to rule the Gaza Strip in the next coming weeks in order to ease up the humanitarian aid. And this is a political question. This is not a military question. This is a political question which should indicate if there is a real willingness from the Israeli government standpoint to actually get rid of the Hamas, not only from a military standpoint, but also from a logistics standpoint. And this is a deadlock because the government is not able to make a decision. So the situation is going to be worse and worse.
Indeed, and as you're saying, as our Damon was describing,
yes,
there are innocent people caught in the middle of all this who can't get the treatment.
Yes. On the other hand, the choice is also in Hamas' hands. If Hamas for one day shows concern about the fate and the situation of his population, he can also do things.
I hear what you're saying. Let's bring in from New York. Hussein Ish, a senior resident scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute. Hussein, thanks for being with us.
Great to be with you.
What will happen to the north of Gaza? I mean, clearly there are reports that Israel's intending to try to turn this into some kind of buffer zone, settle it with Jewish settlers. I mean, obviously, there's no mention of how Palestinians fit into this. And clearly, at the moment, it's a battle zone. So everything's up in the air. But down on the ground, as Damon was just describing, there are people who have very little, if not nothing, and their lives constantly at risk.
You're absolutely right, Francois. That's exactly the situation. I do think the Israelis are moving, whether it's a coordinated plan or this is just the way it's working out because of the logic of the conflict, they are depopulating the north and turning it into a de facto empty, not buffer zone, but battleground. And that's not going to change. The Israelis have been sucked into a trap. You'll note that there are more Israeli soldiers dying now on a daily basis than there were a year ago, practically speaking. The war has intensified for them because their war is over. They went in, they began in the north, they went all the way down to the south in Rafah. They wiped out everything above ground of possible value to Hamas, and then their war ended. But they didn't leave. They stayed. So now Hamas gets their war, which is an open-ended insurgency, which can be done by small groups of people who are willing to die with limited arms, who can make life miserable for Israeli soldiers and pick them off 2, 3, 5 at a time, what have you. Now, I really think there is no solution for Israel other than either leaving Gaza, which it does not want to do, or depopulating Gaza. And if they depopulate the north, then they'll have to depopulate the center, then they'll have to depopulate the south. There is no end to this logic. It is an endless war, and it has become a war for one purpose only, which is on October 7 of 2003, after the Hamas attack, Netanyahu promised a mighty vengeance. And that's all we're seeing from the beginning of the war until now, is just an extended exercise in vengeance. It's very savage.
43,500 killed so far is the figure I'm seeing, Hussein. Thank you for your first contribution. I'll get back to you very shortly. Before I bring in Bertrand Besancenot, can we just hear from the spokesperson for the Israeli government, David Mensa, talking about what's happening in Gaza?
Israel is increasing the volume and the routes of aid into Gaza. Today, the Kisufim crossing was open to get more humanitarian aid trucks in. That means more food, more water, more medical supplies, and more shelter equipment to central and southern Gaza. All of Israel's efforts are fully in accordance with international law. A total of 1,122,000 tons of humanitarian aid have gone into Gaza on 57,000 trucks and 10,000 pallets. Over the last day in northern Gaza, in Jabalia and Beit Hanun, hundreds of food packages and thousands of litres of water have been delivered. These have gone to Gazan civilians still remaining in Beit Hanun in cooperation with international aid organisations. This was in addition to last week's 11 trucks of food, water and medical supplies to the Jabalia camp.
The narrative from the Israeli side of things, the words there of David Mensa, who is the spokesperson of the Israeli government. Let's bring in Bertrand Besancenot, a former French diplomat, former French ambassador to Qatar and Saudi Arabia, consultant with ESL. Bertrand, when David Mensa was speaking there, it sounded like a lot. The thing is, when it's on the ground, it doesn't necessarily add up that way, does it?
No, it is exactly the case. And I think that most observers which are there are saying the same thing. And it is no surprise that even the American authorities are asking for more, which means that on the spot, on the field, it is clear that it is a humanitarian disaster. And it is not only a humanitarian disaster, but even politically, it is another disaster, because what is happening, the behavior of the Israeli government, makes that many young people in Gaza who have lost a father, a mother, a brother, or whatever, will become one day, if there is no solution, no durable solution, as this was said, it is clear that they will become new Hamas fighters. It will be a different name, maybe. But it means that the perspective of peace is going nowhere for the time being because of this policy, which is leading nowhere. So this is the problem. It is even a long-term problem, not only a humanitarian, but a political one, as this has been said.
Bertrand, thank you very much indeed. Let's go back to Arwa Damon, who is in Gaza, founder of the International Network for Aid, Relief and Assistance in Arwa. Arwa, I've looked at your social media feed, which is illuminating and very, very humbling to see the work you're doing there. And the images you've shown are very distressing, and clearly you're in the heart of what is happening. Almost 44,000 Palestinians killed where you are. The aid coming in, I imagine it's only in drips and drabs. Is there an issue that aid will not reach the right people because of Hamas being there? Can you give us some kind of illumination on that, please?
Yeah, and thanks for asking that question, because I did want to clarify a point, and that is that Hamas does not control the aid, and Hamas does not control the logistics of the aid. The biggest challenge that we face as aid organizations are obstacles that are being put into our way by Israel, or Israel's unwillingness to facilitate our ability to pick up the aid. The logistics cluster, for example, just put out a statement saying that movement to Kerem Shalom, which is one of the main border crossings that we need to go to be able to pick up aid, those movements have all been denied. We cannot move within Gaza to any of these border crossings without a coordinated movement with Israel, and Israel designates the routes that we use. So one, you have the challenge of us actually being able to go to the crossing point. The second challenge that we have is this increased lawlessness that has been a very severe issue since about March or April. And because of that, we do have numerous incidents of aid convoys being looted. And this is why we have
Arwa Damon sadly cut off in the middle of a very interesting point she was about to make, and we've got so much more to hear from Arwa Damon. If we can re-establish our link with her, she's in the Gaza Strip, so obviously there are complications, and we will get back to her as soon as we can. Nonetheless, let's continue our debate with our guests here. Of course, two in the studio. We've got Bertrand Besancenot, former French diplomat and former ambassador to Qatar and Saudi Arabia, consultant with ESL. Mark Lefebvre of the Meretz Party,
yes,
left wing on the Israeli spectrum. And joining us from New York, it's Washington, D.C., rather, excuse me, Hussein Ish, senior resident scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute. Hussein, can I bring you in and ask a question regarding what happens to the young people of Gaza? Bertrand mentioned earlier that people who've lost family members may, of course, have that anger that makes them radicalised. Are we going to see, do you think, going forward? And I can understand why people get angry, because if it happened to a family member of mine, I'd be angry. Are we going to see more and more young people in Gaza basically turning towards radical measures?
This kind of experience does not pacify people. It enrages them. It fills them with the sole mission in life to take revenge for their families. It fills them with fury. It fixes them in a relationship of kill or be killed with the only Israelis they ever see, who are these soldiers who are hanging around in Gaza for no obvious purpose other than to continue to try to kill them. And I think Hamas has a steady stream of young men who do not need a lot of training and who will be willing to die. And we know from recent history that you can conduct a very effective insurgency on a shoestring and under very onerous conditions if your cadres are willing to die. You don't need an extensive command and control network. You don't need sophisticated weaponry. All you need is this constant flow of alienated, infuriated young men who are willing to give their lives. And I think they clearly have that.
Hussein, thank you for now. Let's go back to Arwa Damon, who's now re-established from the Gaza Strip. Arwa, I hope you can hear us. We can see images moving. Let's ask you to take up where you were cut off. You were explaining about the distribution of aid. You were explaining about the problems that you face, those obstacles. Can you continue with that story, please?
Yeah, so, to sum it up, we face challenges when it comes to whether or not Israel is permitting the aid trucks inside Gaza to move towards the crossing point for pickup. We experience challenges when it comes to looting along the routes that Israel designates for us to use, because we can only move along those routes. And we face challenges when it comes to our own personal security. And these are not challenges and fears for our own personal security that are posed by Hamas. They are fears of challenges to our personal security posed by Israel. There have been numerous incidents of Israeli forces firing at aid convoys after those convoys' movements have been approved by Israel. And as such, when it comes to crossing certain areas, for example, crossing from south to north, even if we have the proper permissions, most organizations are unwilling to do this in what's called a soft-skin vehicle, i.e. a normal vehicle, because of the frequency of shooting incidents at Israeli checkpoints. And I do believe that there needs to be an acknowledgement on a much wider scale that Israel is not fulfilling its obligations, has not even come close to meeting the demands by the United States. What we're talking about here is a population that is being bombed, starved, and deprived of humanitarian assistance and access to medical care in a systematic and increasing level. This is my fourth trip back to Gaza since October 7th, and every single time I come back, I think that it cannot get worse. It's not possible for it to get worse, and yet it does.
Anthony Blinken has spoken to say that military assistance to Israel is renewed. It's not going to be changed. He has stressed that he wants to see more steps to basically improve the humanitarian situation. But from what you're saying, it sounds like that is almost a mission impossible.
It's not just a mission impossible. From what we're seeing here on the ground right now, it's as if Israel has completely ignored the U.S. request, which is not entirely surprising, given that on more than one occasion we have heard the American side coming out and saying that, Israel agreed to X, Y, and Z, and then the Israelis either come out and deny that they've agreed to that, or quite simply do not implement those kinds of measures. It's quite clear to anyone working here and to anyone who's trying to survive this nightmare, the population here, that America is unwilling or unable to take the necessary measures to actually force Israel to alleviate the situation and the suffering that takes place here. And that is something that is so unconscionable on so many levels. But the population here is very well aware of the fact that when it comes to at least the Israeli, the American, and mostly the Western perspective, their lives are worthless. They are very well aware of the fact that they are viewed as being less than, and that they are being treated as less than, and as such, they're dispensable. And it's a complete and total tragedy.
Damon, for now, thank you very much indeed. Let's move our debate on to talk about what difference Donald Trump and his administration may or may not make to the Middle East. Clearly, he has his ideas, but we know that his way of operating is all based on what's kind of in it for him and what the deal will be. We know that Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president, has spoken with Joe Biden today in Washington, D.C. He's also had a conversation along the line with Trump. Anthony Blinken speaking with Ron Dermer, an Israeli minister in Washington too. Action on aid is what Blinken has called for. And we've said that he's confirmed the military assistance to Israel for now will not change, but they're looking for more humanitarian aid to be boosted. Awa was very clear on the obstacles involved in that score. Michael Waltz has been appointed as National Security Advisor in the new Trump administration. There is a hardline element, gentlemen, and Awa, to what these appointments are making and what the kind of atmosphere that they are describing. And Bertrand, can I bring you in to talk about this one, about the way that the Trump administration is taking shape? Do you think this will lead to Netanyahu getting what he wants in the Middle East, or will there be a different kind of equation that emerges?
What is clear is that Netanyahu didn't listen seriously to what President Biden was telling him. So this is quite clear. And until the end of his mandate, it is clear that Netanyahu thinks that he has a free hand to do whatever he wants. Now the question is, and what about President Trump? On one hand, he said that the war should end before he's entering into office. which can be a good news. It means that at least there is a perspective of stopping this war. But on the other hand, he says also that he will let Netanyahu do what he intends to do. So for myself, it is still unclear. Maybe for the war in Gaza and in Lebanon, we could see the end. I don't know in which conditions, but we might see the end of the war for the reason because President Trump said that he wants to be the man of peace. He talked about the Abraham agreement. He's talking about Ukraine. So maybe he wants to show that he's a man of peace in stopping the war. Now the question is for the second part of it, which is what will happen with Iran. Because, of course, we know what are the intentions of Mr. Netanyahu. On the other hand, we do think that in the US, there is no willingness to go again directly into war in the Middle East. So what will be the outcome, the support to Netanyahu, on the other hand, not to be involved in a direct war on Iran? So is it a negotiation in a position of strength to push the Iranian to make some kind of compromise at a time where they are in a very difficult situation, both economically, politically, and security-wise as well? So for all those reasons, they might be more open to a kind of compromise. And as President Trump says that he's the master of deals, maybe there is a perspective there. At least we hope. But this is still unclear, to be frank.
Master of deals. He's been bankrupt a few times too, so maybe he's not as good on deals as he says he is. Can I bring you in to talk more about this one, Mark Lefebvre, founder of the Peace Now movement, member of the Meretz Party, which is on the left of the Israeli spectrum. Of course, the current administration very much, well, it's the most far-right, hard-right administration that Israel's ever seen. Trump's amount of peace is something that he might say, but in a sense, did he not kind of like set the fire without exactly striking the match? I mean, some of his policies in his first time round kind of created or bigger gaps within the Middle East. I'm thinking like moving the capital to Jerusalem, those kind of things. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem, sorry.
At the moment, every country in the world have a fear about what Trump may do.
It's because we don't know, isn't it?
The only ruler who is self-confident about Trump is Netanyahu, and I think he's wrong. I think he's wrong because sooner or later there will be a fight between those two egos, and one is ruling a large country, the other is ruling a small country. And I think as far as Iran is concerned, you may notice that the Mullah are very cautious not to launch any counterattack or any ballistic missile attack against Israel. And I think they are very cautious and they are smart. And I think what they will do is that they will try to engage Trump into a negotiation about kind of settlements, and the Iranians are very good at losing wars and succeeding in negotiations. And at one point, if you look at the negotiation for the nuclear agreement many years ago, it lasted for 2 years, 3 years. And I think Trump is in a hurry to have fast results, and he may be keen to achieve fast results to the extent of endangering the position of Israel, because he wants to have a quick deal. And I don't think he's so smart as the Iranians are in negotiations. So there is a possibility that a kind of a framework agreement will be settled that will not be in Israel's favor. And then Netanyahu will be in a big conflict with the states, and he will have to show to his people that his promises are not met. To the contrary, and in a sense, that's a crisis that I hope will happen.
Mark, thank you. Hussein in Washington, coming to you next. But before that, let's take a listen to the Finance Minister Smotrich of Israel talking about the project as he sees it, inspired, I think, by Trump's election, to annex the West Bank.
The only way to remove the threat of a terrorist Palestinian state from the agenda is to implement Israeli sovereignty over all of the Judea and Samaria settlements.
Hussein Ish, let's bring you in on that one. Senior resident scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute. The Judea, Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank, and some would say the occupied West Bank. There we go. So basically, is this going to happen? That's the big question. Do they feel emboldened by Donald Trump's election?
They definitely feel emboldened. I'm not sure Netanyahu is the most confident. I think Putin is the most confident. I think he's the biggest winner. But yeah, the Israeli right feels very emboldened. In January 2000, Trump issued a peace plan, so-called, in which he invited Israel to annex 30% more of the West Bank, including all the settlements, plus the Jordan Valley. That would mean that any remaining Palestinian areas would be entirely surrounded by greater Israel, meaning that you could not really have a viable, independent, truly sovereign Palestinian state. And David Friedman, who was Trump's ambassador to Israel, who's remained very close to Trump political circles and will be influential in this administration, just wrote a book called One Jewish State, in which he says the answer for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is for Israel to annex all of the occupied territories, including most, if not all, of Gaza, and make the Palestinians their residents, not citizens. No votes, no citizenship, just they stay in their own country at the sufferance of Jewish Israelis. I think these people that we're looking at right now, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, who are the most ardent annexationists and who've been put in charge of the West Bank over the past year to keep them away from the wars in Gaza and Lebanon because they're so extreme, I think they do believe their time has come. Both of them have put on Twitter that, or X or whatever it is, that they think this is the time of annexation. They call sovereignty, but they mean annexation. And they expect that Trump would go along with it. I think Trump is hoping to make a deal, but really he has three possible deals in the Middle East. The hardest one is an Israeli-Palestinian deal, and I really don't think he's going to try it. I don't think he's going to get it. They may annex. If they do, I don't see him as the one who's going to stop them, the way I think Biden probably would have. The less hard deal, the medium deal, is the one with Iran, which he could get if he wants to, but he's going to start by squeezing them. And the question is this pressure campaign, maximum pressure, return to the maximum pressure, is it designed to soften up the Iranians for an agreement, or is it an effort at forcing regime change? We don't know. There were two points of view in the first Trump term, and neither was decided. And the easiest deal is probably something with Saudi Arabia, but that would have to involve Trump forcing the Israelis to give a little bit more on the Palestinians and the Saudis accepting something less than both sides think they're doing. The problem is that Trump, the deal maker, is a myth. He never made a single international deal. He broke a lot. He broke the TTPS. He broke the JCPOA. He broke all kinds of deals. He didn't really make a single important deal. So it's just a myth. We'll see if he can try again. And in another 4 years, maybe he can make one.
Hussein, thank you. Before we go back to Gaza to get Arwa's comments on that, let's just bring you a reply to what Finance Minister Smotrich said. It comes from the French Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs, Jean-Noël Barrot, speaking at the Paris Peace Forum. He also said that there would be a possibility that the EU could launch a new round of sanctions against extremist Israeli colonists. But let's hear his reply to what Finance Minister Smotrich said.
There is no confirmation of his arrival in France. What is clear is that we denounce the policy that this Israeli minister encourages, which is illegal under international law, namely the aggressive colonization of the West Bank.
de la Cisjordanie. Nous avons été moteurs pour
We were the driving force behind creating a sanctions regime at the European level against the settlers and those complicit in their activity. It was activated twice, we've levied sanctions twice, and we are working on a third round of European sanctions.
Excuse me, I misled you. Monsieur Barrow was here at France 24, and I'll big up my colleague Karine de Camere, who was putting the questions to him. Let's go back to the Gaza Strip, where Albert Damon is waiting for us, founder of the International Network for Aid, Relief and Assistance in our hour. You're in the place where I read a couple of weeks ago and interviewed someone about it, that there could be gated communities where Palestinians will live, patrolled by private patrols. And you just go between the lines there, you see it's actually mercenaries. It sounds like an internment camp. That's one plan. There was the Jared Kushner plan to turn Gaza into a kind of Dubai, Singapore kind of scenario. Lots of projects, but not many plans for the Palestinians.
No, and that really comes as no surprise to anyone here, because many do believe that they are currently right now living their very own extermination, no matter which way we look at this, with all of the rhetoric that is coming out of the Israeli side, with the complete and total lack of accountability when it comes to, Israel's actions, whether it's, the bombings that are taking place here, the forced displacements, the settler violence that's happening in the West Bank. It's quite clear to Palestinians that Israel can act with impunity and that no one is really going to stand in Israel's way. What was quite interesting to a certain degree was after the U.S. elections, I was speaking to a couple of friends of mine in Gaza, who are Gazan, and they were saying, look, it doesn't matter to us, who is actually in the White House. U.S. foreign policy towards Palestine and Palestinians doesn't really tend to change. But if Trump is in the White House, as he is going to be, at the very least, our end, our demise, whatever this sort of scenario is, it's going to come faster. And there really is this sense that, they have no agency over their own life. But, as we're kind of discussing all of these very different moves and maneuvers, it's also quite interesting to note that meeting that took place between Saudi Arabia's top military chief and his Iranian counterpart that took place, and how a sort of rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran is going to play into the whole dynamics of all of this, because Saudi Arabia has been quite adamant that it is not going to sort of improve its own ties with Israel unless there is some sort of resolution to the overarching Palestinian-Israeli crisis.
So that could be the thing that comes into play, do you think, what Saudi Arabia says?
It very well could be. And, it very well could be that what we're seeing right now, if it is to amount to anything, and it's quite interesting to note that these meetings between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the first one that took place earlier in the year was organized by China, but that there is, other forces that are at play. This recognition that, the Middle East should not and cannot be the sort of proxy battlefield for the U.S. and Iran, or even for, Israel and what it is attempting to do. There is a sort of recognition that, matters need to shift more towards having decision makers for the region actually be forces that are in the region. Now, whether or not this actually causes Arab countries to stand up and take a more firm position against Israel than we have been seeing them taking up until this point, that remains to be seen. But at the same time, there are quite a few interesting dynamics and behind the scenes meetings that have been taking place. But to bring it back, to Gaza and what's happening here, look, I've been in and out of war zones since 2003, and I have never seen anything like this anywhere. Not anywhere in Iraq, not in Mosul post, 2016 with the battles that took place against ISIS, not in Fallujah post 2004, not anywhere in Afghanistan. And if history has anything to teach us, it is that when this level of pain and suffering is inflicted upon a population without any sort of solution to alleviate that pain, the next incarnation of an armed group always ends up being more violent, more vicious than its predecessors.
Well, thank you. Mark, you were trying to get in.
Yes, I would like to refer to what was said, which, from my point of view, is a little bit too simplistic. The situation is much more complex. And I react as an Israeli, not essentially from the left wing. I mean, this situation in Gaza will not have occurred if the Hamas has not triggered the massacre of the 7th of October.
No one disputes that. No one disputes
that. Because it's very easy and very simple to put the blame on Israel on everything, but this disastrous situation in which the Gazan people are faced with is essentially and primarily under the responsibility of the Hamas.
But at some point, though, does Israel need to stop? 1,200 dead on October the 7th, nearly 44,000 dead now, Mark.
Okay. So, but for
humanitarian question.
Okay, but this is also part of the Hamas strategy. The Hamas strategy, in order to avoid any possible solution to the conflict, is to inflict as much as possible civilian casualties on its own population. So it's too simple to put all the blame on Israel. And besides, I wanted to ask also something about the declaration of Smotrich. Smotrich represents a party which, in the next poll, the latest poll, represents 2.5% of the Israeli vote.
Hear what you're saying. He's still the finance minister.
His party will not even pass the threshold and will have no members in the future Knesset. So we should not overestimate the declaration of Smotrich.
We will wait and see what Donald Trump says. Bertrand, I'm sorry, we're out of time. We've got to leave it there. But thank you all for joining us. Thanks to Damon in Gaza. Thanks to Hussein Ish in Washington and Mlev Bet Bzo and Bertrand Bzo here in the studio. Most of all, thanks to you all for watching wherever you are in the world. Stay with us. Much more to come here on France 24.